Alex at Corumdale Farm. We are an Oklahoma flower farm selling retail cut bouquets from our roadside stand. We just finished our second year of sales and our season has now ended here in the fall. And I haven't kind of decided yet with our intro when I'm going to start saying we're a year 3 farm, because everything we're going to be talking about today and our future videos is going to be focused on the 2024 season, which will be our 3rd season. It is our goal to be a successful flower farm that is profitable. That is how we make all of our decisions more often than not. And it colors what we talk about on our channel and what our goals are for our family farm, to make a profit with my husband working full time, with me as a mom of 4 that homeschools our children. How can we have a supplemental income, profitable family farm? And so today we're kind of going to talk about what goes into that reality of being profitable is the hard decisions of saying no to certain flowers. And it is hard when the flower catalogs come in, when you go on Instagram and see what everyone else is growing, especially the farms you aspire to look like, and see what their grow lists look like. It is very easy to then decide that you yourself in your farm want to grow everything. And our farm philosophy is very steak and potatoes. We want to actually have a much shorter variety list that is filled with flowers that are the most profitable for the way we grow and all of our capacities and harvest. How should I say this by capacities? With me being a stay-at-home mom and Eric working full-time and not having employees, which flowers give us the most money with what we are able to manage, and then also what they cost us to grow is a big factor. And so because of that, I end up Xing out a lot of flowers that I think a lot of you may grow or some that you might be passionate about. And so maybe in the comments, you can tell me about how angry you are at me for cutting that one out because I am so wrong. I'm sure that happens. So again, this is my opinion of what works on our farm, our growing conditions, and what our customers want. And so because of that, your grow list might include some of these flowers because it is what grows beautiful in your climate, or it is what your customers are asking for. In which case, this isn't about the flower itself, it's more about your market and your conditions. And if you satisfy all of these questions to ask yourself, well, then that flower really should be grown on your farm. It just might not work for others. And so almost this video is more important about giving you things to ask yourself when assessing your own grow list than it is about being super nitpicky about what is particularly on my list. But if you sell retail, if you sell from a roadside stand or a farmer's market, and you are in a warmer climate or a harder growing condition, I think what's on my list might end up actually being on your list too, but we'll find out. And you can yell at me in the comments. I am okay with that. I can be tough. I am confident in my no choices here. The first one on my list, and these aren't in order of like I hate you most to hate you least. They're just what I wrote down when I was brainstorming. But the first one on my list is cosmos. Cosmos look beautiful, especially when you see a big harvested bouquet shot, you know, a big armful of just beautiful open cosmos. They're so romantic and airy and fluttery. And I think they're beautiful. I actually don't think that they're a distasteful flower like maybe I would for some other choices like echinops or stuff like that. That's just not really my vibe. But I do not like it. I do not like to harvest it. I do not think it likes Oklahoma with our heat. It tends to want to, it doesn't die, but it tends to want to wait to really look magical in the fall when it cools down a little bit. And the vase life is a bit tricky. It can be very finicky and you can think you harvested it correctly and then it just wilts on you. I want flowers that have a really long vase life that I don't have to baby too much with the perfectly right harvest time and conditions and post-processing and praying that you're not just going to randomly wilt on me. So I don't think it's carrying its weight in what it does. And it also is a filler. And we can get into this a bit when I get into some of my other choices of what we're not going to grow. We do not grow a lot of filler on our farm, and Cosmo is definitely in that category. Some people just harvest it for its greenery and don't even pay attention a lot to its bloom, and that is not what I am looking for. We will do a video in the future about everything I am going to grow on our farm, and if you were to like compare these videos side by side, you would see on our grow list that it's almost all flowers and very few filler. So Cosmos, unfortunately, it's just not going to happen. And I don't even know if I'll miss it that much. Next on my list is stock. Stock is a cool flower. You typically plant it to overwinter, or you would plant it like late winter, very early spring, and it would bloom for you typically maybe like after your tulips, kind of maybe during ranunculus time, maybe a little after. In Oklahoma, we have a very short spring, and so we're very cold in February, pretty cold in early March. We have kind of a spring for the last 2 weeks of March and first 2 weeks of April, and then we are off to the races into early summer. And by that I mean like we're already in the 80s in the April timeframe. And so because of that, it's very tricky, not impossible at all, but it's tricky to get stock to be happy in those conditions and to give you the stem length that you want. And that to me is a pickiness level that's not worth it on our farm. If I was selling to florists, if my florist really wanted it, then it would actually probably be worth it to me to spend some more time dealing with its pickiness because of the demand for my customers or my clients that were wanting it. Because I'm not doing floristry work and because I need good stem lengths to fit in our wrapped bouquet, I need a certain length for even it to go in the wrap and not get swallowed up. It's not worth all of the extra attention and then praying with the temperatures that we don't heat up too quickly before it gets into its peak bloom, before it starts to shut down again. And so I tried all the flowers on my list. I have tried, and I tried stock. They kind of tell you should try a flower a couple times before axing it. I get that. I probably could trial it again in my raised garden in a smaller quantity, but I just don't have the time. I'm not that invested in needing it that it's worth trying to troubleshoot and figure out. So unfortunately, stock is out. I know it smells beautiful, it looks beautiful, but just not for us. The next ones I put in a group, which is a lot of the cool flower fillers that you see a lot. So I would put in that category Nigella, bachelor buttons, bells of Ireland, a lot of the cool flowers that you can overwinter or again early spring. I did a bunch of them again in our raised garden trial space, and I ended up using them, but they just weren't bulky enough in the bouquets to feel like they were making the visual impact I wanted for our customers to want to be excited about harvesting them. They tend to be very airy and thin, and so you have to use a lot of them in bulk to even notice them. And they just felt like they were kind of getting lost as just true filler in a way that didn't feel exciting. Like I don't even know if my customers even knew what they were or it was benefiting the bouquets. And so I would have rather put one more sunflower in the bouquet than have 3 of those filler. Because of how thin and small they were, it just wasn't adding weight to the bouquet. And so it would just have been easier for me to grow more sunflowers with my timing than it would be to grow all of these additional filler. Again, these are really popular with florists, and so you might be making a different assessment that you're not looking for a bouquet composition, you're selling by the stem or by the bundle, and your florists want that filler and they're looking for that, then yes, again, like the more monotonous harvesting of a bachelor button makes sense because it's really carrying its weight in what you're selling it for to your florist, but they're just not. I'm not going to purposely grow them again. I let a bunch of them go to seed, and so I'll be curious how much comes back, and maybe if I'm just like really needing some extra stems for whatever reason, I might cut on them out of necessity, but I'm not planning to grow those particular flowers next year. The next one on my list might make you faint. It doesn't pain me to say because I've come to terms with it at this point, but I am not growing dahlias. I'm not going to grow them again. I'm done. I gave them 2 years and talked with other growers and was really observational, and I've just come to the very firm, committed conclusion that in Oklahoma, dahlias are not going to be profitable for me. And there's a couple reasons for that. First is our climate. We are very hot and very dry typically for a very long period of time. I'm talking end of June through after Labor Day. We are in sustained 90s and 100s, full sunny skies. That's really hard and stressful on dahlias, that sustained heat. We're also really dry, which means we're relying on our drip irrigation exclusively, often to water those. And sometimes it can be tricky to really dial in the right amount of moisture for dahlias who are very thirsty plants. And so that's tricky. The third reason is we have very high bug pressure in Oklahoma. We have every grasshopper in the United States residing here. We have earwigs and thrips and cucumber beetles and every single bug that wants to munch on a dahlia petal. And so while yes, you could plant so many dahlias that the bugs couldn't get to all of them and then just cut the ones that survived, that doesn't seem like a very smart, profitable decision. Or you can organza bag cover them. I do not have time or interest in spending the time to bag dahlia blooms. That does not seem like a profitable use of my limited time. When I'm not selling to florists, I'm selling retail, and my customers in Oklahoma are not as familiar with dahlias as they would in other parts of the country where they're easier to grow or they're more common, and so they know what they are and they have an increased perceived value in different places in the country. In Oklahoma, I could put a dahlia in a bouquet and I could put a sunflower in a bouquet, and most of my customers would think they had similar value. And they do not. My sunflowers are about $2. My dahlias would be $4 to $7 depending on what that variety ends up being. That's a big difference. And if my customer doesn't see that, why am I spending a lot on tubers, waiting months to get my first bloom, plant in April, maybe see blooms in July, and bagging blooms potentially, staking them, babying them, when my customers don't see that? And then to add on top of that, they have a really short vase life. And so if my customers already don't know what a dahlia is, they don't appreciate a dahlia for what it is and all of its fleeting beauty, and then they buy a dahlia and it lasts 3 to 4 days in their vase when everything else in the arrangement is lasting 7 to 10 days, they're going to leave feeling disappointed in that bouquet rather than if I had given them another sunflower and they have a perfect long-lasting 7 to 10 day bouquet and are pleased with it. And so it just does not make sense for me to grow them. And often you have to grow dahlias in a much bigger quantity to see a lot of that return on your investment from a profitability standpoint. Because if you can grow dahlias and you're only growing 5 or 6 of them, or even just 10 of them, 20 of them, they're not giving you truly that many stems. But when you see some of the bigger farms, they're planting 3,000, 5,000 dahlias, and it's clearly a high demand product that they have, it starts to make sense in profitability of why those farms are making those choices. But for us, which is small scale, we're on a 1/4 acre, we sell just retail to customers, I think it would be letting my emotions and my view of flower farming from Instagram lead my decision making over what the reality is for me in Oklahoma with my customers to continue to force myself to try to grow dahlias. It is so much more freeing to be like, they're just not for me. I grow some in my personal garden because I can baby a couple plants. I can enjoy them personally. If it doesn't work out, oh well. But in the field, in a commercial setting, dahlias are out. I know it's painful. I know it's painful, especially if you farm in like Michigan or Oregon or Pennsylvania. It's like the dahlia possibilities are kind of endless there comparatively, but you have to be realistic of what your customers want, what your field ability is, and what your growing conditions are. And sometimes you have to make those hard decisions. Another one, I'm looking at my husband out the window. We're building our high tunnel, so yay. Another one for me is Strawflower. Strawflower, maybe I should have given it another try, but personally, I just don't like them. I think they're kind of ugly. I'm sorry if you like them, not personal, but I think they're kind of ugly, and I don't like how they sound. I like the ASMR stuff with like the crinkliness of the Strawflower is just not for me. I didn't like them. I just thought they were dinky. They were finicky at harvest. You know, sometimes it was really inconsistent in how they would respond. I don't have time for post-harvesting processing drama. I just want flowers that like you can reliably cut at a certain stage, put them in our dark processing room that I'm in right now, and when I wake up the next morning, they look fine and happy, and there's nothing picky and fussy I'm having to do with them. And Strawflowers, unfortunately, didn't fall into that category. Now, if you do a lot of dried flower work, Strawflower might be great for you because you can cut them, you can dry them. You're not dealing with the fussiness of like a fresh cut sunflower, but they just were like blah to me. I'd rather maybe just grow some more zinnias if I wanted like a similar shape or color palette, or there's other choices that I would fill in maybe for dried if I was looking for dried flowers. So they're just kind of like a not really worth trying harder on is what I would put in that category. I have a couple more left. I'm not completely negative. I am actually growing flowers next year. I didn't just axe everything. But the next one on my list is Yaro. I would say the same things about Yaro a little bit. I struggled a bit with stem length, which I'm sure is totally my fault because I know Yaro can have very long stems. I grew too much red. I do not like the color red. I know there's other colors you can choose from. Ultimately, though, I did not like the look. Maybe that's what I'm cueing in on. Because we live in the prairie plains of Oklahoma, we have a lot of pasture and prairie. My goal in being a specialty cut flower farm is to be completely different than that. I don't want anything that even remotely resembles a wildflower look. So I don't grow like Rudbeckia. I don't grow natives. I mean, I have them in our landscape, but I'm not growing natives. And Yaro kind of fit into the wildflower category for me because white Yaro is almost invasive here. There's so much of it, especially in the pasture. And I just think the colored Yaro still made me think of that. And it felt too wildflower and less specialty cut flower that I want our bouquets to look like, where it's like there's no chance you would think I cut this from my field, like my backyard. My flowers don't look like that at all. And so Yaro kind of went into that category for me. But I know they're popular, and I know they come in pretty pastel colors. I have two more remaining on my list, but these have asterisks next to them because I'm not 100% settled, and they're kind of like teetering. They haven't like fully got the axe, but I kind of want to axe them. So the first one is Finina. I like it. I think it's a colorful, pretty little puffball that looks like a Dr. Seuss flower. Gets a lot of attention from my customers, especially when they see it in the field. They always want to ask what it is because they've never seen it and it's unique and interesting. So it's definitely in the positive category. The negative category is I find it to be a complete pain in the butt to harvest fresh. I can't get the stem length I quite want, even though I'm like pinching and it's branching. It's just not quite as long as I want. I get a bit annoyed with like the wiggle test to wait till it's mature enough and it's not just going to droop in post-harvesting. And so it's just kind of like, I love looking at it. I love talking about it with customers. And then I go to harvest it and I end up just like giving up and quitting and saying like, I don't want to deal with you. You're driving me nuts. It's also not very bulky, so I need like 2 or 3 stems in a bouquet for me to even feel like it's noticeable amongst the flowers. And so that's a lot of stems I need to cut. Say if I'm making 50 bouquets for our stand on a Saturday, 50 bouquets times 3 Gumfrina each. So a lot of stems to harvest of something that drives me a bit nuts. And so that's leading me towards wanting to kick it out. On the other hand, I do have a goal next year of offering some more dried options in the fall when that's kind of the aesthetic of what people are thinking about and kind of how they're decorating and crafting and that kind of stuff. And Gumfrina dries so well. And when you're going to dry Gumfrina, you don't have to harvest it in the same way you would fresh, where you're doing like individual stem cuts with the stem length for a wrapped bouquet. You can sickle down much larger chunks. You can sickle down a couple plants and then bunch them up and wrap them for dried. And then you can use the puff balls, whether if you're making like pumpkin, like dried pumpkin arrangement stuff, or you're selling more of like a, like the dried flower confetti, which is really popular and stuff. And so it's not giving me the same pain in the butt, fresh cut problems. So I might grow it again, but growing it knowing I am picking my colors and I'm planning to grow it for its dried uses and not include them in like my bouquet recipe formulas that I'm field planning right now. So Gumfrina, TBD. You'll have to check back and see if it ends up in my field or not. And then the last one that also has an asterisk is Gladiolas. I love them. Personally, I love the tall spike. I love all the colors and the ruffles. I love Gladiolas. They're all over my raised garden and in my perennial gardens. They will overwinter here wonderfully, so I just can plant them out there and enjoy them. This was my second year growing them for the farm, and it was a hard year with them. They had thrip issues, so there was like deformities that I didn't get ahead of time, and so it was a loss. And Gladiolas are kind of like tulips, where you buy the bulb or corm, and that's it. Like if the bloom is affected and you can't cut it, that's all you're getting from that plant. And so it's a much higher risk, higher input for one flower type scenario. And again, with my customers, I think they were familiar with them and didn't dislike them, but they weren't like gravitating towards, oh my gosh, I need the bouquets that have Gladiolas in them. I want that. It was more like, oh, interesting. I like this flower. That's not a worth it enough reaction for me for the cost of the material. It is laborious to plant them because we have to plant in landscape fabric at 6-inch spacing and they have to go down pretty deep. So it's actually pretty miserable planting them versus tulips, which I can plant much faster. Because it's only one flower and they take a long time to grow. I plant in April, they bloom in June, and I harvest them. I can't let mine perennialize in ground because they're in landscape fabric, they're in our production fields that we till and flip over and silage tarp every year. So I'm having to rebuy them as if they're an annual. And so it's hard for me waiting for the product in July to flip that bed and plant something in it that I still have time to get to maturity to then use and sell sometime in the fall. So from a row standpoint, it actually is taking up very expensive real estate for what it's giving back to me in its one stem, one time a season. Now, the reason it has an asterisk is I'm considering planting them in crates and putting the crates in our high tunnel. And if I did it that way, one, way easier to plant. I can fill the bottom of a bulb crate with some soil, pop them in, cover the soil over, done. Infinitely faster than planting them in our clay in landscape fabric out in the field. So that checks that off. It's not taking up as much space because in the crates, I can move the crates around. They can sit in the high tunnel. They're not taking up valuable field space. So it checks that off. And so what remains largely is just getting on top of the bug pressure. It's possible, but glads are very easily affected by thrips, and it can be a never-ending challenge, especially if you already have them on your property, to protect them. So I might trial a smaller batch in crates with an increased focus on dealing with the pests. And if it goes well, they might be back in rotation in year 4 in a much bigger scale, like with a lot more crates in our high tunnel. And maybe over time, I can also convince our customers maybe to love them as much as I do. So it's kind of like on Finina and glads, or like you're on probation. Like, I'm watching you. If you get the cut for next year, you need to perform or you're for sure eliminated. So that's my list. I know that's a lot of common flowers that people do grow that I'm putting in my not growing list. But the most important thing to ask yourself is the questions like, what does it cost for me to grow this flower? Am I just growing it because I think everyone else is growing it and I need to grow it? Or is there a reason that you're growing it? Like, my customers love this flower, or my florists are requesting I grow this flower. Or, yeah, it's super fussy and high drama, but I get to charge top dollar for this flower. And so effectively I'm getting paid for the fussy maintenance on this flower, and it's worth it. And if your flowers, some of them are failing these sorts of tests, I think you really need to ask yourself, am I growing on my farm, if you're a flower farmer, am I growing to be a profitable business, or am I growing with more of a hobby mindset? Neither of those are wrong, but where you go wrong is if you think you're a business, but your choices are like a hobbyist. If you're like, nope, I know I lose some money. This is a hobby that brings me joy. We allocate for it, and I want to grow all the things because I love all these things. Then by all means, keep growing these flowers and enjoy them in your cut garden, in your hobby garden. There's nothing wrong with growing excessive flowers for the sheer joy of growing the flowers. But if you do have a goal of being a profitable business that brings money in to your family and doesn't operate at a loss, I think you need to get serious about asking yourself these questions and then being confident with your choices and not feeling less than or bummed out or just negative about choices you've made for your farm because you go on Instagram or Facebook and you see these lists of what everyone else is doing. I think it would actually be more exciting to be confident in your profitability and how you're running your business than what it is you actually grow. And I know that can be hard because we all want to grow all the beautiful flowers in the catalog, but that, I think, rapidly leads to losing money. So that's our no list. We'll be making a positive yes list in the future, but I hope this was helpful. And while you're spending this time crop planning for next year, really be asking yourself and get honest, take the emotions out of it, and grow things that you can excel at and earn you money because it's what your customers want or your florists want, that it's what your market wants. I think you'll be happy at the end of the day when you calculate your taxes and your expenses and you're like, I made money, this is good. So I hope this was helpful, and we'll see you in the next video.